All right, well, I'm chopping in a quick little video here because I just learned something today and I'd wanted to share it with everybody to explain what happened when I was in the last video working on the stern thrusters. So I was explaining what happened towards the end of that video, so there's a chance you didn't make it through to that point. But I was saying that Sideshift sent me these 3 or 4 inch long stainless steel hex head tapered bolts to go through the plates to, bolt the thing to the swim platform. And I had 4 of these on each plate, and 2 of them, the bolts, the nylon lock nut bolts that they sent me went all the way to the top with no problem. But 2 of them got about halfway up and I couldn't make them go any further. And I wound up cutting them off with a hacksaw so I could replace them with a different bolt. And I said in that video, I just couldn't understand how I could start a nut on a bolt and, be way up it before it got, in my mind, cross-threaded. So being a technician guy, I just have been chewing on that, and I couldn't understand what happened, and I wanted to get to the bottom of it. I just had kind of thought, well, maybe these guys just bought cheap bolts from somewhere that makes cheap bolts, and they were badly threaded. But then the other part of my brain kept going, come on, Don. A tap going up a bolt is cutting the same size thread all the way up, and there's no way that the tap got it. I just was like, that couldn't happen. I couldn't think of a way you could have a cheap enough process that you could wind up with threads that were off. Well, I ordered some bolts for the Jeep project from a place called boltdepot.com. And in with the bolts was on this piece of paper with the order information, there was this thing that mentioned galling of the threads. And it referenced a website or a page that they have on the website. So I went to that website, and I've got it open here so I can quote it exactly in a couple places. But basically, thread galling happens when you run a nut up a bolt, and it can kind of take off the surface layer of the steel a little bit and build it up inside of the nut and essentially cold weld the nut to the shaft of the bolt. So let me explain this a little bit better here. Here's how they explained it. They said thread galling occurs during installation when pressure and friction cause bolt threads to seize the threads of a nut or tapped hole. And galling is most often seen in stainless steel, especially when using lock nuts. Exactly what I was doing. I had stainless steel bolts with lock nuts, and it says basically, this is a thing that can happen, and you're supposed to do 2 things. First of all, go slow when running the bolt up the thing, and don't try to pull your joints together with your bolt if you're doing that, because that puts additional stress on the threads, which will make that happen. But it also says use an anti-seize lubricant, and in the picture they have actual anti-seize stuff, but they also have WD-40 shown there. So maybe WD-40 could do that. So it says, why are stainless steel bolts prone to this? And it says, here's what it says, okay? Stainless, aluminum, and titanium fasteners form thin protective oxide films on their exposed surfaces that prevent corrosion. I kind of knew that. I knew that with stainless steel, the very outer surface of that thing kind of changes its properties a little bit, and that's what keeps the thing from rusting. So it says that protective oxide film can be rubbed off or scraped off under the pressure and movement of the fastener being tightened. And so these relatively soft metals build up against each other, and the nut seizes to the bolt threads. exactly what happened to me. Now this bolt in my hand has actually, I ran this one, I started this one up and I started to have a problem, and this is when I was getting suspicious, so I'd stopped and backed off. But even with my fingertip, and I mentioned in a video somewhere else, maybe on the Jeep stuff, how sensitive the surface of your fingers are, how you can feel little tiny little microscopic differences in surfaces. I can actually feel a difference on the very sharp edge of the threads here at the very bottom, where I've already run one of those lock nuts up there, and I ran it up to about this point where I did start to have problems with the thread right there. You probably are not going to be able to see that. But if I go past that, I feel smoother threads there. So I can actually feel the evidence of this thread galling here. I had no idea that was a thing. No idea whatsoever. But I'm really excited. What a geek, right? I'm just really excited to understand what happened, because I just couldn't understand what happened. I was like, I could see if I cross-threaded the thing at the very end of the bolt and started the nut on, cross-threaded something there, and I was cutting into the threads all the way up, and I was causing a problem from the beginning. But I did not. It wasn't until I got way up these things I started having the problem. And that makes sense. I was building up that little oxide layer inside of the nut until, as it started to get up there, it built up, built up, built up until it eventually cold welded itself to the shaft of the bolt. And there we go. That's what happened. So I now know something I didn't know about stainless steel bolts. And if you're familiar with boats, you try to use stainless steel everywhere you can to eliminate corrosion, but I'm now going to add some anti-seize lubricant to my bag of tricks. And from now on, when I'm working with stainless steel bolts, even if I'm not putting a lock nut on them, I'll be aware of this galling process, and I will put some anti-seize on to avoid it. So there you go. I'm just going to throw this up on the video on the internet and explain what happened. So far, no one in the comments has said, "Hey, Don, here's what I think happened to you." So maybe we didn't all, none of us knew this except the bolt magicians at Bolt Depot. But now we all know about it.